All right, so um, let's move on to the next one, grids. All right, so click grids, download it to your computer, and then you're gonna open it up in Colab. And so you're gonna click file, right? Upload notebook. You're gonna choose a file from your where you saved your file from the canvas, and then you're gonna continue with this work. All right, so let's start with this one. So grids are general types of plots that allow you to map plots types to rows and columns of a grid. This helps you create similar plots separated by features. So what we're going to be able to do is have another way of doing a comparison between columns that allows us to be able to see any relationship, if there's direct or indirect relationship between columns. And this is very important when we actually want to determine what kind of features do we want to be able to implement in our machine learning. I know that we haven't quite talked about machine learning yet and talk about features and labels, but this is going to be a very important tool that allows us to be able to see correlations. So we already talked about correlation and be able to see those in a matrix plot, but we can also see them in a graph, in different visualizations of a graphs. So this is going to allow us to be able to see that. So the first thing we want to do is, again, import our Seaborn as SNS. We're going to also import Matplot live.pyplot as PLT. We're gonna click that, we're gonna make it run. And what we're gonna do again, we're gonna extract some data from the Seaborn database so that we can play around with it. In this case, what we're gonna be using is the iris. And we're gonna be doing sns.load.dataset. So again, we're gonna extract some dataset from the library Seaborn that is stored there. Again, we can do it using a CSV file or an Excel sheet or a text file, but right now that's not what we want to practice. We want to practice playing around with different graphs, so that's why we're just gonna use the one that is built in Seaborn. All right, so we're gonna check the top files. I'm gonna close this one. .head. Oh, sorry. So that way it's gonna let us be able to see the columns of our data iris. So this is talking about petals with length species. So we'll see different things that we can do with this. The first grid that we're gonna see is we're gonna look at the Seaborn pair grid dot iris. So right now we're looking at the iris, and you can see there's nothing yet there. We haven't indicated what do we want to compare. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna input it into our map. We're gonna map it. So right now, what we did is just create this pair grid that, but we haven't displayed. So in this case, we need to actually say to the computer, we want to be able to display this grid, right? So this is building the grid, and now what we need to do is we need to make it into a map to be able to graph our grid with different columns. So let me explain this again. So this is making the grid. So this is an object grid that's going to contain the information from iris, but that doesn't make it into a grid yet. What we need to do is we need to make it into a map where we're gonna display it as a scatter graph. So we can use different types of graph if we want to, but here we use a scatter. And so what we can see here is that the relationship between the sepal length and the sepal length is the same, it's linear, right? You can see the straight line because they're the same information. But you can see now the comparison between the sepal width and the sepal length. There's some sort of correlation there, but not so much. But the petal length and the sepal length, there's some sort of correlation there. There's a linear correlation between them. And sort of the same thing with the petal width and the petal length. Sort of, there's like some correlation there. So this allows us to be able to see different correlations between different graphs, right? It makes it a little bit easier to compare columns and to be able to see the correlation. It's important to be able to see the correlations because the more correlated, then we can actually be able to see which ones, like I said, which one will make a better feature to make a prediction. So we're gonna do the same thing now. We're gonna do we're gonna create this object, Seaborn pair grid of the data iris. We're going to then gmap. We're gonna map it to map dialog. We're gonna map the diagonal. The diagonal with a plot of a histogram, and then we're gonna use the we're gonna gmap the upper with a PLT scatter. So we're gonna choose that the upper graph of the upper grid of the graph will be made of the scatter. The lower map, the lower grid will be actually will be a KDE plot. And if you remember, KDE is a kernel density estimator. All right, so it doesn't recognize that one. Because I put PLT instead of SNS. Should have been an SNS. It's a Seaborn, not a Matplot. So what this does is saying to the computer, how do we want to be able to graph each of those grid sub sections? So on the middle one, we're using a histogram. On the upper top corner, we'll be using a scatter, and in the bottom part, we're using a kernel density estimator. Okay. Right. So we'll move on to the next one. And here we can, if we just do SNS, again, here, plot iris, we're just gonna have the diagonal being a histogram, and then the top and the bottom will be a histogram. We can actually separate the different data using different species of the flower. So remember, the iris is the different species of flowers that contains different information of length with height for the petals. So what we can do here is we can separate them by color of the first parameter is for the data, and then the hue will allow us to be able to say what do we want to focus on. We want to focus on the species, and then palette will be the color. So we want to use rainbow. And so we can see here the separation of different petals on different species, right? And so this allows us to be able to organize our visualization a little bit better. You can see here that automatically puts the legend on the right side with the Setosa, versicolor, and virginica species of the petals. Okay, so allows us to be able to see some correlation if we need to. So you can see that all the Setosa's petal length is lower with the petal width, and then the middle, you can see how they correlate with each other in the middle, in the center. So there is some sort of a relation between them. And then we can do other ones, which is let's grab tips with, let's load that again. Tips dot head. So we're just right here extracting the data from the tips, making it into a data frame. And now what we want to do is we want to make this grid using the face facet grid with tips column equals to time and row equals to smoker. Put this in. Oh. Let's put this in quotations. So right now, remember we gotta put it into the map if we want to be able to see them. Right now, this is just setting up the grid, but it's not seeing any data because we haven't put any data on it. If we want to put any data, what we need to do is, I'm gonna put this again here. If we want to see the data, we need to put it into the map, right? Remember, we have to say gmap. And so we're gonna put in what kind of, how do we want to display this data into this grid? And so in this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a histogram, and we're gonna use a total bill as our column that we want to display. So we're gonna display it as a histogram, and we're gonna use a total bill for the data. We could use here scatter if we wanted to. Forgot the parentheses. Missing two required position arguments for x and y. I mean, I could put here oh, let's put time and I guess it's not gonna let us. I'm gonna take it back to the histogram. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna have to try with this one. Okay. We'll figure it out. So again, we're gonna use the phase grid. So I'm just gonna copy this. We need to resave it again every single time because we're rewriting it. So when we rewrite it over here, we're losing the information of the phase grid. So we're losing it here when we rewrite it to, we save it back to G. So that's why I have to write it again. So in this case, we're gonna use tips. The column will be time, the row will be the smoker, and the hue will be people, male and females. So let's do sex. And then we're gonna have, let's see if we can figure this out. G map, let's do the scatter, and it said that I was missing one argument. So this requires two arguments. So we're gonna do the total bill, and maybe let's do tip and see if that is going to work. So it does work. So I just needed to put the extra. It was requiring an extra uh, an extra argument. All right, so let's do another one, join grid. And let's do SNS dot join grid x equals total bill, y equals tip data tips, and Seaborn. That's no attribute. Joint grid. Joint with a T.